Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmy Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity. So as you're going through this continuous improvement process, part of that is recognizing that there's problems, right? There's problems, there's challenges, there's issues, there's things that need to be fixed. So as you're coming across these different problems, it's definitely important to focus on kind of the critical few, like the few things that you know are really going to make that dramatic difference. And it's tough when you may find yourself in a situation where there's so many problems, so many things are broken, and maybe it's just because of that. The company wasn't forward thinking. There wasn't continuous improvement processes. So all of a sudden you wake up one day and processes, systems, techniques are outdated and old. And now you realize, well, in order for us to continue to move forward, we have to change, but we have to change everything. And again, when you're trying to survive, it is very difficult to not at least attempt to change everything. But it is important when you're thinking about, now that we know what these problems and challenges are, how do we go about solving them, is doing your best to focus on, again, the critical few. We mentioned kind of the Pareto principle and that 80-20 rule, right? So focusing on the 20% that are going to get us 80% of our results. Again, which is very difficult when there's so many different things going on, but that's where hopefully you have the proper resources in place to help you to prioritize, to kind of go through those process improvement, strategies to really say, okay, we know that we have 5 or 10 things literally, that need to be fixed, but what are the top 3 that are really going to get us to where we need to be short term, and then even in long term, as we start to continue to then focus on some of these other things that are on that list as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's where, going back to some of the tactical component, right? So I know I spent a good portion of the time kind of talking about the commitment, and the cultural commitment to seeking out continuous improvement. But here is where I will make a plug for some of the tactical benefits of traditional process improvement methodologies, is because it's very easy at times when you're looking at a mountain of problems to say, well, we got to fix it all.
Yeah.
Like, it just all has to get fixed, right? Because I understand too, as organizational leaders, as operational leaders, we're wired to be able to think, well, I can't endorse any of this being broken, right? So like, if I just say like, oh, well, we're only going to focus on this, that's kind of like me saying, well, we're going to focus on this 3, but the other 7 is acceptable, right? And that is counter to how we're wired. Like, no, absolutely, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
It all needs to get fixed right now, right?
None of it.
Yeah, none of it is acceptable. It's all bad, right? And so while I get that and I appreciate it, tactically, you can't eat the entire elephant, right, in one bite, right? You have to really prioritize what is going to have the greatest impact, and that's where I think using some of these tactical methodologies for process improvement is critical, because you have to be able to remove emotion from it and speculation. Like, if people are going into the discussion saying, okay, well, what should we work on? Well, I think, right? Well, I think this is going to be the best. Then we shouldn't be thinking at this point, right? And especially we find ourselves as an organization that's in survival mode, we have to be sure, right? So where are the facts? And so some of these more tactical methodologies that are requiring us to define the ROIs is critically important, because then you let the data drive the priority, right? If I'm looking at 10 things on the list and one thing is going to be dramatically transformational in terms of its ROI for the organization, lifting our revenue 10% versus something that's going to weed out, 0.5% of waste, right? half a percent of waste, well, it's very easy. It's very obvious what I should do, what I should focus on,
Mm-hmm.
what I should focus my efforts on. And so I think a big part of being able to solve problems, right, to your point, is being able to hone in on what is the most impactful problems to solve for. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get to it all,
Yeah.
right? But you need to concentrate your efforts, right? You need to concentrate your efforts. You need to concentrate your resources, right, to drive the biggest impact, right? To drive the biggest impact. Um, and so I think kind of you sharing that is critically important. Like the Pareto principle definitely works, but again, leveraging some of these traditional process improvement tools can really help you to define that ROI. And I would say, after that, right, really, as you're going through that process of defining what those problems are, um, being relentless about looking beyond the obvious, because I think that's a shortcoming too. Um, just for organizations, sometimes we think that um, the gap or the problem is, oh, like I'm looking at it right now, right? Like, let's say sales are down, right? Revenue's down. Oh, okay. Well, the problem is that the salespeople aren't trained. That's the issue, right? Like I went on one ride and I listened to the sales pitch, right? Or I listened to a couple of sales calls, and the problem is that the salespeople aren't trained. The salespeople are bad. That's it. That's the problem. That's obvious, um, and that may very well be true, but we owe it as an organization to do our diligence and to dig beyond the obvious and to ask the consistent whys to really get down to the root cause, because the root cause may not be a training opportunity at all. The root
Mm-hmm.
cause may be a system opportunity, right, where your sales folks are they have to approach their conversation a certain type of way because of system constraints, because we have an archaic system or a dated methodology, right, that this is the only way for them to do the job. So they do the job that way and we get the results that we get. And no matter how well you invest in the latest sales techniques and strategies and lingo and objection resolution and super fancy, verbiage, right, to overcome, challenges or resistance, if the system is still the same, you're going to still get the same results,
Yeah.
right? And now our resources, our efforts were invested in the wrong place, and it's not driving the type of impact that we want to see in the organization. So I think that's the other challenge, for a leadership team, for organizations, not just to um, make sure that we're focused on, narrowing our scope of what we're trying to solve for, right, and honing in on the ones that are going to be the most impactful. But as we're doing our diligence to identify the problems and get to the root cause, that we're not just taking the obvious answer,
Mm-hmm.
because again, it could be something much more systemic that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So what I heard you say is, which I definitely agree with, right? Is using making sure that you're doing the proper analysis and you're looking at the facts and looking at the data, and where is that leading you to the biggest ROI and return on investment that you're going to get for these efforts that you're going to put forward, and then with that root cause analysis is asking those five whys, or asking the why question 5 times. So you ask it the first time, you get the response, well, why is that? Well, why is that? And you continue to go down. But even after you get to that fifth one, continuing to ask more questions and really dig deep into all of the possible areas that could be affecting maybe this one issue. Um, and I always love when you use an example like that, because even it could be training, but sometimes depending on the operations team, uh, that word just training is just kind of flippantly used a lot. And oh, it's a training issue. Well, it's not necessarily a training issue. We have workarounds because there's bugs or there's things that are broken within the system. So we've created workarounds. Okay, yeah, I'll give it to you. We haven't trained, let's say, new hires on these workarounds, but we shouldn't have to have workarounds because we should fix what the problem is in the first place.
Correct.
Or when you say training, is it the content, and is it the content that needs to be updated? Are there changes that we can make from that perspective? Or is it the delivery of the content itself? And are the things that we can do within the trainers, the leadership team who's delivering the content to help them develop, right? And make sure that they have what they need to be as effective as possible. So yeah, there's always just a litany of different situations that can come into play. So you have to keep an open mind. You really have to probe all of the different sources that are out there to get to the root cause, the absolute root cause of the problem, and continue to ask as many questions to feel confident about the analysis and then your decisions moving forward on what you feel are going to be the proper steps to solve the problems at hand.
Rage on that beat, going crazy.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmy Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.